Last time, we looked at the blank century through archaeology. Bronze bells disappearing, keyhole tombs spreading across the full length of the archipelago, burial goods shifting from mirrors to weapons, the center of royal power moving from Nara to Osaka. The ground kept a record during the years no one was writing anything down, but the Chronicles didn't leave those years empty. In the Chronicles' own dating system, which places these reigns centuries earlier than archaeology suggests, several emperors are placed in the sequence between Suinin and the era of the Wa 5 kings. When we overlay the archaeological timeline we've been working with in this series, the memories recorded in those reigns begin to align with what the ground is showing us for the 4th century. Emperor Suinin, Emperor Keikō, Emperor Seimu, Emperor Chūai, and Yamato Takeru. The prince who killed the Komaso in the west, subdued Izumo, received the grass-cutting sword from the shrine at Ise, survived a fire on the plains of Suruga, watched his wife walk into the sea, and died broken on a mountain in Owari before rising as a white bird and disappearing into the sky. Today, we look at what the Chronicles put there and what it might actually be recording. Suinin's reign contains one of the most recognizable origin stories in Japanese tradition. The Nihon Shoki records that when Queen Hibazu Haim died, the emperor was troubled by the practice of burying living attendants alongside the dead. A man named Nomi no Sukune stepped forward. He proposed replacing the living with clay figures shaped like people and horses, placed around the tomb instead. The emperor agreed, and that, the chronicles say, is where haniwa began. Even the word itself, haniwa, appears first in this passage. Archaeology complicates this. The earliest haniwa, cylindrical in form, ritual in purpose, are traced by archaeologists not to this moment, but to specialized ritual vessels from the Kibi region of what is now Okayama Prefecture. These appear in the late Yayoi period, before the story the chronicles tell, and the figurative haniwa, the human forms, the horses, the warriors, come later still. House-shaped and weapon haniwa begin appearing from the late 4th century. Human figures spread through the 5th. The very forms the origin story describes are among the last to arrive. The tradition is generally understood as a later creation, a story told by the Haji clan who oversaw tomb construction to explain their own origins and authority. But something is still worth noting. The tomb, designated as Suinin's, Raikozan Kofun in Nara, is classified as an early Kofun period burial mound. It is a place where the chronicles story and the archaeology tend to be discussed together, even if they don't entirely agree. One more connection here, the fact that haniwa traced back to Kibi, the region we've been watching since episode 3 and the Momotaro special, is not incidental. Kibi's ritual pottery and burial customs were deeply woven into the formation of Yamato authority. The clay figures that would eventually ring the largest tombs in Japan began in that western region, not at the center. If our working estimate holds, Sujin in the late 3rd to early 4th century, then Suinin's reign would fall somewhere in the early 4th century, within the blank period, not before it. With Emperor Keikō, the chronicles introduce one of the most striking figures in Japanese tradition. Yamato Takeru, son of Keikō, prince of the Yamato court, sent west to destroy the Komaso, then east to pacify the frontier lands. His name means the brave one of Yamato, but open the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki to the same story, and you find two very different people. In the Kojiki, Yamato Takeru is a tragic figure. His father fears him. He is sent on impossible missions, one after another with no rest between them. Before he sets out on the eastern campaign, he visits his aunt at the ice shrine and says simply, "My father must want me dead." The story that follows reads less like military history and more like a man condemned to wander until his body gives out. In the Nihon Shoki, that relationship is gone. Yamato Takeru is trusted by his father, volunteers for campaigns, and dies a hero rather than an exile. The grief is still there, but the estrangement isn't. Same battles, same root, same death, completely different inner life. There is also a structural overlap that's worth noting. Emperor Keikō himself is described in the Nihon Shoki as conducting a western campaign against the Kumaso, the same enemies in the same region as Yamato Takeru's western campaign. The two accounts share enough material that some scholars have suggested they may both derive from a single earlier tradition, one campaign that was split across the emperor and his son somewhere in the process of compilation. This is worth keeping in mind as we look at what Yamato Takeru's story might actually be recording. On the timeline we've been building, if Sujin falls in the late 3rd to early 4th century, and Suinin in the early 4th, then Keiko's reign would fall roughly in the early to mid 4th century, inside the blank period, not 4 centuries before it. Trace Yamato Takeru's eastern campaign on a map, from Aize west to Owari, then east through Sagami, up to Kazusa, into Mutsu, back through Kai across Shinano, then west again to Owari, and finally north to Mount Ibuki, where the god of the mountain defeats him and he doesn't recover. That route from the Tokai region into the Kanto plain and beyond is broadly the direction in which keyhole-shaped burial mounds spread through the 4th century. The archaeology and the narrative are moving in the same direction. Now look at the name, Takeru. Written with the characters for brave or strong, was not unique to this prince. In the west, Yamato Takeru kills the Kumaso Takeru. In Izumo, he kills the Izumo Takeru. The title appears again and again, hailed by the powerful figures of different regions that Yamato moves against. Yamato Takeru means the brave one of Yamato. He doesn't defeat random enemies, he defeats other Takeru. He defeats the strongmen of other places who carry the same kind of title he does. One way to read this, the story of Yamato Takeru is the story of Yamato's authority extending across a series of regional powers, each of which had its own strongman, its own Takeru, compressed into a single hero's journey. Not one man, one process. Yamato Takeru may not have been a single historical person. He may have been the name of an era. Here is my reading of what we've been looking at. The people who compiled the Chronicles needed the imperial line to appear unbroken, not because they were trying to deceive anyone in the way we might imagine, but because that continuity was the foundation of the entire political order they were building. A gap in the succession was not something the Chronicles could acknowledge. The line had to be there, even when the records weren't. So what happened to the memories that did survive from this period? My reading is this. The Chronicles took fragmentary traditions, memories of campaigns, of integration, of regional resistance, and redistributed them across imperial reigns, not invented from nothing, reorganized. The memories of a century's worth of expansion became a prince's journey. The slow spread of a burial tradition became an origin story, told in a single court scene. This is different from what we saw in episode 6, where a war was disassembled into separate incidents. Here is something closer to compression. A long process folded into a shorter story, given a name and a face and a death. One more figure before we move on. Emperor Chūai, the 14th emperor, son of Yamato Takeru, husband of Empress Jingu, is told by a god to conquer a country across the sea to the west. He doubts the oracle, he dies. The Chronicles don't explain his death in detail. He simply ceases to be, and Empress Jingu takes over. Whether Chūai was a historical person is genuinely unclear. The non-existence theory is taken seriously by scholars. But as a narrative function, he serves one purpose clearly: to create the space for what comes next. Next time, Empress Jingu. The Chronicles give her a miracle. A stone inscription in Korea recorded something else. Let me bring this together. Suinin's haniwa origin story doesn't match the archaeology. But haniwa do appear in this period, and their roots trace back to Kibi, the western region whose ritual culture was woven into the formation of Yamato from the beginning. Keiko's Western campaign and Yamato Takeru's Western campaign overlap enough that some scholars suggest they may be the same tradition, split, and Yamato Takeru's eastern route follows the direction Keikō tombs were spreading through the 4th century. None of this makes the Chronicles accurate history, but it suggests they weren't working from nothing either. Fragmentary memories of real processes, integration, expansion, resistance, were redistributed across imperial reigns, given shape as individual stories, and placed in a timeline that the archaeology tells us was several centuries earlier than the actual events. The Chronicles needed the line to be unbroken. The heroes were carrying that need. After Chūai's death, Empress Jingu appears. The Chronicles describe her crossing the sea, subduing 3 kingdoms, winning a war Japan has almost no other record of. But a stone inscription raised in Korea in 414 AD describes some of those same years from the other side of the water. The Chronicles gave her a victory. The stone recorded something more complicated. Next time, Empress Jingu. The war the Chronicles wrote and the war the stone recorded. The Chronicles describe her conquering 3 kingdoms across the sea. The Guangaeto Stele records Wa fighting on the Korean Peninsula from the other side of the war. What did the Chronicles keep? What did they leave out? And what does Emperor Ojin's arrival tell us about what was really changing?